talk a little bit about the it's called the BYU North American Family Search Operations Mission, and we tried to think of a longer name, but we just couldn't come up with anything longer than that, so had to settle on that. Let's see, I need to go into my slideshow. So how did this whole mess get started? Well, my helpful cousin, Brent, helped my wife and I make the right connections to put all the pieces together to go on a mission to Denmark. And we had a very wonderful time in Denmark. And right at the end, COVID kind of blew everything up and we had to come home. And so I started jumping in and entering some of these wonderful Danish records that I had into Family Search. And I was doing lots and lots of these. And my helpful cousin asked, what I was doing, and we communicated back and forth about different things. And he said, do you know Dr. Price? I said, no, never heard of him. And so he wanted to introduce me to him and also to the tools, because he thought that would help me with the work that I was doing. So I got connected with Dr. Price and learned about some of the tools and opportunities in the BYU Record Linking Lab. And then Brent said, gee, Todd, you're doing all this work. You really ought to be serving a mission, another mission. And I've got some ways that you can help. And so would you please do that? So a few months after I got home from Denmark, I found myself on another mission with my cousin, working with various census records, kind of working more in Puerto Rico, but other areas as well. This went on for a few months as we're sort of experimenting with different things. And after a few months, we heard that they had finally agreed to start a new mission focusing on the BYU Record Linking Lab tools and projects. And that was interesting, but it didn't impact me at all until Dr. Price and others asked if I would help start up the mission. And the fun thing about this was we had to be a couple. So they said, Tara's got to join too, and my sweetheart. And she surprised me by saying, yeah, I'd love to tackle that and bring up a brand new mission. So we started this a little over a year and a half ago, got the BYU Record Link. It wasn't the BYU Record Linking Lab, it was the North American Operations Family Search, blah, 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 that we had. And I do need to share with all of you that to put this mission together, Tara did all the work and I got to have all the fun. That's how it's supposed to work, I think. So this was such a unique mission, partly because we didn't know what we were doing, and partly because we just struck off on our own and says, what is it we want to accomplish and how do we get there? So there are some very, very unique differences with our mission versus all of the other NAOs in the church. Our mission was completely virtual, and some of the others were as well, but we had all these wonderful missionaries and we never ever met a single one of them. So that was kind of unique for us. Ours was the only NAO mission that I was ever aware of that did no indexing. Most of the NAO missions were primarily indexing in one way or another, but we did absolutely no indexing throughout our entire mission. You probably, those of you who have been participating in these missions, there is a central project priority planning meeting that occurs every week where they talk about the different projects that are going on and they assign different responsibilities and projects to various missions and assign how many missionaries are going to tackle this and that and the other. I attended that a handful of times and then I realized we don't do any of that stuff. we don't care what the other priorities are. We're doing our own thing and we just don't participate in the priority planning meetings because we're doing our own thing. So that was a very big difference as well. we simply didn't participate on that other scale. The next really big difference was that almost every NAO mission worked so hard and wonderfully and diligently on the 1950 census when that came around. And we made sort of a corporate decision across the board that the very best thing that we could do to make the 1950 census valuable and helpful is to accelerate the work in the previous censuses, getting a lot more of the 1940 and 1930 censuses on the tree would make the 1950 census even more valuable and fit in and just become a great and useful tool. So as a mission, we decided that we wouldn't participate in general in the 1950 census, all of the tremendous work. And we have nothing but love and respect for all of those great missionaries around the country who did so much to bring that 1950 census work together. But we didn't participate at all in the 1950 census. Another thing is we don't do family lines. Our focus is by area, by community, by county, by census designated places, by states. We were concerned about the records in this area, not the records of this family. So that was kind of different for all of us. Our primary focus in our mission was the US Census records. We certainly did other things as well, but we really had a strong focus on getting census records from the 1900s up through about 1940. And our backbone, or the real primary network that we were putting together, was the 1910 US Census. We tried so hard to have everything we could on the US Census come ready and into the tree. And then just as I was finishing up, we were starting with the 1880 super connecting families in the 1880 census, etc. Our initial focus was the individual states, and we're very thrilled that most of those were done by the time we finished up. So the 1910 census is primarily done. We had a strong focus as well on the census records that would enable us to connect African-American slave descendants. We found that they were very underrepresented in the family tree. So by focusing aggressively on those populations from the census records, we were able to make a significant difference there. We also did deep dives or extensive census linking, plus other sources, vital records, cemetery records, etc., to create pockets where we really had extensive connections done. We did some of these in Puerto Rico, and you've heard about some of the ones. Dr. Price has talked a lot about Skagit County, Washington, where we put together all of the census records, all of the vital records, cemetery records. His thinking was, or his desire is, if your ancestors passed through Skagit County, Washington, we ought to have their information in family tree. And that was kind of the nexus of it. But then we expanded that into other communities in Texas, Arizona, Eastern Montana, on and on. And with these deep dives, we had considerable flexibility for personal preferences of places and projects. We were all working on the 1910 census aggressively, but at the same time, we were all kind of free to tackle other areas, places of particular interest. I spent a great deal of time doing deep dives throughout Eastern Montana, where we had lived for a number of years. And everybody kind of had their own special pet things that they were able to do deeper. You know, we'd pick up the Goldie Mae records or whatever to push a little further in other areas. We sometimes involved in these deep dives with other resources, sometimes missionaries, sometimes not, but we created lots and lots of pockets of deep, broad records so that there are kind of connecting links throughout throughout the country. Then, after a little while of having this mission, somebody got the brilliant idea, let's have BYU Idaho family history students do an internship, and we'll do it under the auspices of this particular mission. So we had to pick that up and start that off about a little over a year ago. The internship was started to give BYUI students the opportunity to design and carry out some wonderful family history projects, to learn the BYU tools, the Goldie May and the Map app, etc., to gain a greater understanding and working ability with US Census records and other records, non-census records, in designing and completing special projects. The goal was to add significant numbers of persons to the family tree and significant number of sources to the family tree. And we wanted all of these interns to learn to involve others in their family ward or community in completing some of these family history projects. We had to teach them and work them on other data sources. We taught them how to access and utilize and work with Find a Grave and Billion Graves, tremendous resources. And some of them did projects specifically around cemeteries, and utilizing these tools, they were able to really pull some good information and coordinate that with census records. Some cemetery files, obituary files, historical records, books and newspapers, other vital records. A lot of these were involved in the deep dives, and many of the wonderful projects that they put together were what you might call deep dives, where they used census records and all of these other records to really get deep and wide in a particular community or county, and did some tremendous work. Sometimes they used military histories and ship's logs. We had people that did projects relating to ship manifests and personnel in the military, other special projects like that. We had some wonderful projects where they took high school yearbooks and added all of the pictures into Family Search and put together all of the families of those individuals. There were some great projects. You may have heard some of these projects presented in the Bridge Forum, and you may over time hear more of them, but just some tremendous things. We had in our time 3 different people work on the Japanese internment camps from World War II, and they had to learn how to use the governmental final accountability report of what happened to these Japanese Americans. So they learned to use all these different data sources in the completion of their projects. The point or the goal being to make these connections, make family connections up and down and across, as wide, as deep, and as broad as we could, so that we can have the connections that we need so that everyone can find their family and make those connections. So what was accomplished? Well, the 1910 census was nearly all gathered into the family tree. The deep penetration into the 1920 and 1930 censuses via the wonderful tool Goldie May that we all absolutely love and utilize so heavily. There's an increasing number of community deep dives or reconstitution projects or blanket coverage. Goes by a lot of names, but just where we try to have really deep penetration into a community to anchor the records for that area. Through these projects and through our mission, we have trained hundreds of ordinary people how to do the Map app, how to do Goldie May, how to use other tools to connect with the BYU Record Linking Lab and their special projects. And working with these interns, we worked through dozens of unique and wonderful special projects, which taught all of us new tricks, new sources, new ways to connect records to the tree. Everybody that tackled something, we learned so much. We kind of got them, pushed them down the road, and when they came back, they were able to teach us so much. And if I can close this up and unshare. Did I unshare that? Joe, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, Todd. I meant to say something earlier. Yeah, you weren't sharing, but actually, I think it worked just fine. Like the way you described it was perfect. And so,
Oh, I wasn't sharing?
no, I'm so sorry. I meant to tell you. I didn't. I couldn't find the moment, but yeah, Todd, that was perfect. And so, and actually, if you send me your slides, I'll make sure it gets posted on the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah, nobody said anything, so I'm sorry about that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Todd. And we'll have some questions at the end. So if you have questions for Todd, that'll be really fantastic. But with that, let's turn it over to Julie. So Julie, I've made you a co-host. So if you want, you can share your screen.
I will unmute and I'm going to share my screen. But that's not showing my internet tab. Okay, here we go. And sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I think you can just hit. Oh, there you go. Oh, perfect.
Okay, so now you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, so my presentation is, and this is all the way at the end. I'm so sorry. This is at the end of the slideshow. I am having some technical difficulties tonight.
There you go.
Okay, now we'll try this one more time. Okay, so I started visiting Mecklenburg County, Virginia in January of 2001. And when I first went, everybody kept telling me, there's no tombstones, there's no records. We've all been looking for 20 years. There's nothing to find. And I said, well, maybe we could just put these little pieces of information together and it will become something. And so I've had a lot of help, a lot of collaboration with people over the years. And some of the cemeteries I've taken pictures of, and people didn't know that decades later, somebody, some descendant had put up one tombstone. So usually when I find these cemeteries, I'm lucky if I find one or two tombstones for most of the county. And then I do a lot of things with deeds, working with hunters, like deer hunters. They are the best helpers for me. And there are a number of myths that I don't have time to go over, but I just wanted to say that in Virginia, just because you see a cemetery that doesn't have tombstones, people assume it is a slave cemetery, but it is not. The majority of people could not afford tombstones in Virginia. So that's where, this is a cemetery in front of you on this slide, and there's actually about 30 burials. And so this would be a headstone, and there would be another one that's a footstone. And only one time have I ever seen somebody's name carved into it, which I will have as an example in here. So this is Richmond. This is where our records were kept. And everything was brought to Richmond because it was a Confederate capital. So all the records were going to be safe. And so when the Union Army said they were coming into Richmond, the civilians were able to leave, and then they came back to get records. And so everything that we have that is before 1865 is because somebody took it out of the city and brought it back to the city after the war was over. And this is the street where our records were kept, and you can see all these burned out areas and reconstruction, all the different things. There just was not money for tombstones, and it was just not a priority. We had things like that you couldn't farm at battle scenes, which might not seem like much to some people, but most of Virginia was a battle scene and became burial grounds for where a lot of the battles took place. We had a lot of drought and crop failures, and people mortgaged farms that had been in their family for generations, and they lost them. So tombstones were just not a priority. And then you can get things like this says that Bracy area where my family is from, this is 7.5 miles by 5 miles. And when they finally do have records, then it says something like near Bracy. So it's pretty vague. So what do you do about this? Because this is what everyone kept telling me when I was looking for cemeteries and trying to find information about my family. And one other thing is that there was a dam put in for electricity and for flood control. And this is one where it says 1,040 graves were moved from 28 cemeteries. And there were 6 other things like this. And none of the names were known. So they were just all moved to this mass cemetery. And so this is the kind of obstacles that I've run into working with rural cemeteries. And I want to share with you a couple things that I've tried to gather some information. So this is a family cemetery that I have found. And one of the things that I learned is that part of family reunions, or a main reason for it, was to clean up the cemeteries. Something like this is how a cemetery could look in 6 months. The jungle, the vines, it's just a lot of work. And so people would gather to clean up the cemeteries, and then the older people would tell the younger people where everyone was buried. Sometimes people wrote that down in their Bibles. And that's something that I ask for is, have you ever heard of anyone writing down where anybody was buried? Or can you tell me where any cemeteries are? And my very first cemetery, when I was looking on Nellie Jones Road, I had a plaque that showed Nellie Jones Road. And I made 50 copies, and I went door to door and knocked on it. And I had my name and number on this plat. And I said, I'm looking for a cemetery, and I'm looking for where this piece of land goes. And this is the street you live on. If you ever find anything, would you let me know? And I handed it out, and everyone was interested. And most of the people I talked to, it's the same families from the 1850 census. They've been there forever, and they were very interested. And people did call me back. Little by little, people kept calling me back saying, oh, I just heard that there's this cemetery. And that's how I started up with this. So I've worked on a website, and I have a map that I use GPS pens. The hunters find this for me, and they take me out there, and we get GPS coordinates. And then I've made church pages. Now, most burials were not at churches before World War I in this area. And so on the church pages, I have about the church and about the cemeteries. And so I've been doing cemetery and church pages together. It's still in early phases. One of the first things that people recommended I do is take the USGS maps, because they mark cemeteries. And there were men who walked the grounds looking for these things. And these are the cemeteries that they had. I marked this one here. This is where Nellie Jones lived. And this is the road, Nellie Jones Road, that she's named after. So this is what they found. And this is what I have found working with the community. So each one of these is a cemetery. And then these are churches that have cemeteries. So this is the same area as this. These are all the different cemeteries that I have found. And I got these plats from when people lost their farms and they had to be divided, or if somebody died without a will and they needed to divide it in Chancery Court is where this happened. And so I go to the Library of Virginia and get plats so that I can piece them together like this in layers. Then we can see the neighbors. And I know that this cemetery that I just showed you and this cemetery, they're sisters. And then each one of these lines going down were sisters that lived here. And there was a road that connected between their homes. And the cemeteries are along this road on a ridge. So I've been hearing that these are the kinds of areas that I want to look for when I have a plat and know that there's a cemetery somewhere around there. One of the places that I see it is in deeds or wills. They'll mention burial grounds. So I have a lot of places I've heard about, but we haven't found yet. And then I have some where just the hunters know about it. And so they tell me about it. So this is for Nellie Jones. Her will is that she wants a plain and decent burial. And then she lists family members. This is her son-in-law and also her nephew. And this is Robin Thomas, who's her first cousin and her neighbor. And then she talks about land that she gets from Presley Henton. And Presley Henton, in his deed, talked about having a cemetery. So we were trying to see which cemetery, which piece of property Presley Henton had. There's Nellie Jones' burial. The tombstone went up in 1961. And it was the descendants had money, and there was a page in the Bible that they had written down at one of the reunions that this is where Nellie was buried and this is where her husband Frederick was buried. And they took that page from the Bible to get these tombstones made. And then they had these tombstones put up. The page got lost, so we don't know who the other three people are in the cemetery, but they're trying to locate that for me. So even when people say it's just rocks, I say, that's okay. Let me just go out and see those rocks and take GPS pens. And everybody says, well, I know where lots of cemeteries are. I just didn't think you wanted them because they don't have tombstones. So we've been documenting all the cemeteries that we can and hope that every little piece of information we can keep putting together. So this is across the street from Nellie Jones Cemetery, and this is a log cabin that they lived in the 1940s. And these windows, when they open, there's no glass. They just opened these while they were cooking. And the youngest in this house, his name's Thomas, and he told me that his cousin knocked on the door and said, "I'd like to see the cemetery." And he said, "Oh, I didn't know there was a cemetery here. Why don't you take me to it?" So she told him a couple people who were buried in the cemetery. And then he told me, "Well, you go out the front door and you turn to the right and you go a quarter mile and there's snowball bushes." Well, the snowball bushes aren't there anymore. And this house is mirrored. There's a door on the other side, and we don't know what door they considered the front door at that time. So we're trying, this is Jerry, and it's his grandparents' house. So he now owns this land and he's looking for the cemetery for me. But right behind these trees is the next house I'm going to show you, where their aunt lived, and there was a path between these two properties, and we think that that's where the cemetery is. So they're still looking for that. And this is the house on the other side of the trees. And this was Zachariah and Permelia's. And when their parents lived with them, they put this house behind them, and they would have a walkway, but this was considered a plantation. So I know you think of great big, ginormous, grand plantations, but this was referred to in his will as my plantation house. And he owned several hundred acres. So the cemetery is behind this, back in the trees. And we couldn't find it in the summer. And that's another thing the hunters tell me is I have to come in the winter, and then they'll bush hog paths for me. And sometimes the trees are only 6 inches apart, and you just can't get through there because it's been woods for so long. So they'll clear a path for us. And as soon as they'll say, "Somebody just cut down the trees, hurry up and come down and get pictures." And then we go get pictures together. So we found Parthenia's tombstone. That was her parents' house that we just saw. And they put rocks around the cemetery. There is enough space for one person on either side of her. My assumption would be that that's her parents. And this cemetery is right in front of this oak tree. So we don't know for sure, but we can say this was Zachariah and Permelia's land, and they inherited this. It's most likely Zachariah and Permelia, but that's the best we can do. It's an educated guess. And I've got friends helping me. And this is Jerry that you saw in the earlier one with the log cabin, and his cousin who owns the cemetery where Nellie Jones is buried. And it's his dad who helped put that tombstone up. And they're taking this picture over here. And this is the only stone I have where somebody carved their name. And this is actually an African-American cemetery. So, okay, we found Presley Hinton's land and a plat, and it talked about a graveyard, and they said that it's on the south side of the Roanoke River. So this is Presley Hinton's land, number 1, and this road is Nellie Jones Road, and Nellie Jones lived here, and then she ended up buying some land up here that was Presley Hinton's. That's what she's talking about in her will. And then this is the piece that's south of Roanoke. So we know that the cemetery is on this piece of land, which is mostly underwater now. So we don't know where that cemetery is, and we might not be able to find that, but we still keep a list of it. So I made this box. So when I go down there, there's hardly ever internet that works or cell signal. And so I have this file box, and they'll tell me, "Oh, that's at Timmy's first turkey hunt, and that's at Joe's first deer hunt." And I write down these little notes. And when I go to the hunters, I say, "Well, they're telling me that this is on the kid land and it's Timmy's first turkey hunt." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I know where that is." And then they take me out there and we go get pictures. So they might seem like little small pieces of information, but they help us put cemeteries together. And Virginia is very challenging in defining rural areas. And so I made a map and defined them up, defined areas, because this is unusual that there's so many towns in this county. These red numbers are towns, and only 3 of these have local cemeteries that I know of. The rest are all on farms. When the African Americans started having burials, they would have been buried at a church long before the rest of the county started being buried at the churches. So that's another reason why the church pages are important, is because that's where I'm going to get more of the African American burials recorded. So if you're not in a town, the towns belong to the county, and then the rest of the rural area belongs to the county. So it's really hard to define spaces. These are old crossroads and where old post offices were that I divided them up. And so when I'm working with someone, I'll say, which area of the map are you working on? And they'll say, that picture is from area 6. All the ones that I've shown you today are from area 23, and they're actually right where this number 2 is. So this helps me keep them organized. And then on the website, I've organized that this is area 23. These are the churches for area 23. These are the cemeteries for area 23. And it has just helped me with communicating with the community and the people who are helping me. So if you're looking at a regular map, and I hope that you'll keep me on time because I don't know how I'm doing on time. So if you look at a regular map, you won't see cemeteries. And if you're looking on the USGS map, they're so tiny that you're not even, satellite, you're not going to see it on satellite. These are the cemeteries that I have found in this location. And these are back as what I was showing you earlier. And then this is with the plats. So I can see, well, this is where Nellie's property was, and that's where she's buried. This is where Baxter was, that she talked about her nephew and her son-in-law, and that's where he's buried. So I check one piece of property and look for where those cemeteries are on each piece of property. There's one that's just off this page over here that there's about 50 burials, and that's probably where Nellie had 13 children, and most of her children and grandkids are probably buried in this cemetery over here. We don't know because they're not tombstones, but it makes sense because that's where this is the oldest piece of family land, and it's probably where they were buried. So I started this website, and this is where I've listed the family cemeteries. And when I have a page ready where I have pictures, I've marked it in blue. So these go with that map that I was showing you earlier with the numbers. And there's Presley Henton. I don't know where it is, but it's on a deed in 1804, and it's in area 23. And this is just the only way I know to document it at the moment. And when I posted this list, I had immediately people said, well, I know about this cemetery that's not on your list. And then I was able to add it to my list. And then this is what my website is mecklenburgvagenealogy.com. And I just wanted to super briefly show you, if I have a moment. These are the church pages that I've been working on. And there's not very many denominations, so I've been organizing them by, there's the different denominations that I have. And so we're doing colors for the different icons. And then I have what the history of the church, pictures of the church that I'm getting ready to go up here, and cemetery information about the churches. And any of them that are blue, which aren't very many right now, then you can see that page and see the cemetery information. And then the cemeteries themselves, I have them grouped in the local cemeteries. I know of these 3 local ones right now. And that's tombstones, like you would expect. And then this is what most family cemeteries look like. This is a very well-kept cemetery. And I've just listed them alphabetically by areas, and any of the blue ones, I already have a page up and is indexed on the website. And then this is an African-American church. They had a school, and then the cemeteries over here. And so here's a church that I have up here. And this is everywhere that we can find information. People are taking pictures, or it's a link to the cemetery on Find a Grave. And so this is, I think I've probably done my time. So I'll save if you have any questions, but this is some things that I'm trying to do to just hold pieces of information. Then say somebody is from Sardis Church, and they say, well, I have this history of the church, and then here's some cemetery information. It was started this date, or it moved down the road 1 mile, and this is the information on when it moved. And anything that people send me, I've been putting on these different pages. So thank you for listening to me, sharing what we're trying to do to document some of these things that are hard to document. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. And we'll probably have some questions at the end. And so let's do our third presenter. So Eric, you're up. So maybe Julie, just hit the unshare, and then Perfect, thanks. Go ahead, Eric.
I am way impressed. I think I'm a little bit of a emotions junkie or something, because I just like to harvest what we can do from the organization that Julie and Todd have just shown us and what they've been working on. So my share this evening is, I feel a little guilty because it's like the scriptural injunction to not let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. But Joe, as soon as I started telling him some of these cool stories, this was us back in 2019 at Roots Tech, just encourages me and encourages me to first of all to even write these things down. And I'm grateful as this opportunity to share this story with you, that I had so much documented that I had already forgotten in the last 4 years, and made this experience be one that would bring tears to my eyes just thinking about the opportunity I had to look upon the soul of another person and look into his eyes. So by the way, this is the Roots Tech picture that they saw when they opened up registration, and that's me and that's my wife sitting in the front row in 2020. Everybody's teasing me that we're celebrities, so if there's, hopefully that picture is used somewhere in the stuff. If you need an autograph, if you see me at Roots Tech in 2 weeks, I'm happy to help out with that. But no, just kidding. My wife's embarrassed that we sit in the front row and get featured like that. This is Tim Snyder. I met Tim when someone else named Steve came into Roots Tech, and on his way there, he followed a prompting to invite a homeless man into Roots Tech. I was simply the guy sitting at the front row holding some seats for my wife, and she decided not to come to this session. So when I saw two men walking by, I followed a prompting. I remember it distinctly, being encouraged, hey, invite those two to come sit by you. And so since they were walking in, Tim actually had his luggage with him of everything that he owns on this earth at that time. And he sat down next to us, and I'm just going to share with you some of these highlights from this experience that Joe encouraged me to write down. This is the rough draft from the whole experience, kind of the rest of the story from the summary that Joe had posted and shared back in 2019 on the Record Linking Lab Facebook page. So they sat down next to me. We got to know him. As I said, I always sit in the front row, and I was making friends around me and prompted to offer these seats. And I moved over so they could sit next to each other. And Tim and I started chatting. Steve and Tim, for that matter, were getting to know each other. And when I was prompted to ask him, hey, what's your story? He responded right away with, I'm homeless. And I immediately was like, no, you're not. You're right here. You got a home with us right now. We're one big family in this big room. And that's what it was really cool to look into his eyes and see him say, I'm not hopeless, I'm just homeless. Good positive attitude for a man coming in from the cold and making some new friends. I thought it was really cool to be reminded of this. Steve and I took turns putting our arms around him. Just sitting there between us, taking a chance, making sure he felt welcomed. And we were literally sitting at the feet, maybe 20 to 30 yards away from Elder Bednar and Susan Bednar as they were speaking. And so as they went up to start speaking, I whispered in Tim's ear that the man coming to the stage was an apostle on the earth today of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it was such an awesome experience to be testifying of Christ's love through having messengers on the earth today to a man right there in his presence. I remember prior Roots Tech, when Steve Rockwood counseled us to recognize that instead of calling them sacred experiences, to help the rest of our brothers and sisters in this world to recognize them as emotional experiences, to make that a positive thing, that we can share the emotions, and it's okay to feel those emotions with one another as we're being connected with those on the other side of the veil. And he had also, in this session of Roots Tech, invited us to follow promptings and recognize names that would come to our minds during the presentations. So I asked Tim for his dad's name. And as he was listening, I used Family Search on my phone and found a record about his dad. It was actually his obituary. So during the, sorry, I should just read this, but yeah. And then I noticed in the obituary his brother's names. And I was able to show him that obituary and ask him about those names. And up until that point, Tim had a hard time making eye contact. I was just another guy. He's probably trying to figure out if he can trust us and stuff. And when those names came out, when he heard those names, this is why I have it written out. He stared into my eyes with his eyes opened wide, and I felt his soul seeking to understand, and even a little bit of an accusation of, well, how are you doing this? Who are you? What is this? And asking how I could know about this information about his family. And through reading through that obituary and talking to him, he started just sobbing, sharing about being a 16-year-old boy on Easter Sunday of 1981, and his father passing away. I didn't write it down here, but he did share more about how hard it was for his older brothers, not knowing what to do with him. Yeah, his mother also passed away that year. And I love this line here that I was able to write back then. Steve and I made eye contact and recognized that we were following promptings together to help Tim's loving parents to reconnect with the son that they love on the Sunnyvale. And when we think of the vicarious work we're doing, it's really quite a blessing to have those experiences with the living. It was a great day, great opportunity to see his joy. And we tried to follow up and find Tim. We both donated some money and helped him get a hotel room for that night. I found some people with the same names as his brothers on Facebook and sent a lot of messages out, but it was into the next week when I was already back here to Mesa, Arizona, when I got a reply from one of his brothers that he had not talked to Tim since 1981. And he was surprised to hear where he was and had been trying to find him. I guess I want to finish this up by pointing out some of the cool things that have happened. In researching for this, was looking at my message history and found that with Tim's brother, I had reached out as recently as last September, asking if he had heard from Tim yet or not. Oh, and Joe, by the way, did recruit some of the students in the record linking lab. They made an attempt to contact homeless shelters and try to find Tim, since we had found his brother, John. But we could never find him. But in reaching out last September, John let me know he still had not heard from Tim. He said it's been 41 years and still have not heard from him. A couple of weeks ago, when I reached out to him again to double check and say that I was going to be sharing something, he said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we have made contact." I haven't been able to talk to Tim yet. I have his cell phone number. John has been in contact with him. He is still in Salt Lake City. He had some legal issues and is out of jail and working on things and doing well. I also figured out this afternoon when reaching out to Steve, the man who had brought Tim into Roots Tech, that Steve has passed away. And the amazing thing about technology is this afternoon, I was watching part of Steve's funeral, getting to know him better as a person. And it's pretty amazing, these connections still happening across the veil. with those involved in following those promptings, with doing the Lord's will, and having these healthy, good, happy connections. I wanted to say also, beyond this story right here in this example, that we have the chance with the finding our relatives through the family search app and through the RootsTech registrations to make connections with people all around the world that are our cousins. Just wanted to point out a couple here on my messages. Using the location search from the app, you can see where relatives are, those different cousins around the world. And I have one single line on my 7-generation chart that comes from the Isle of Man. And so when I looked last year during RootsTech at some of my cousins, there was someone there from the Isle of Man. And yes, of course, our common ancestor was there, and we've been in touch this last year. Reached out to her a couple weeks ago, and she got signed up for RootsTech again for this year. And I honestly look forward to another trip. I went a year and a half ago to Scotland, and look forward to doing the ferry ride across the Isle of Man and making these other connections on this side of the Vale. So I just want to point out there's other ways, even if you're doing virtual RootsTech, to make these connections, to find people, to ask their story, and get to know more people in the way that God wants us to. We're using this technology, using these opportunities, and following those promptings. So thank you, Joe, for letting me share.
Thanks, Eric. That was fantastic. Well, I'm really grateful for all three of the presenters, and we now have some time for questions and answers. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand on the chat feature, and then I'll let you kind of direct your question to whoever you'd like to ask it. And if not, I have a few questions myself, but let me open it up to everyone else first. So I guess then I will take the first question. So Eric, the question I asked you right before the meeting, I want to reach out to people in my community that maybe are overlooked. I'm thinking of like the trailer park in my community. Do you have any advice for how to just have the courage or love to or what would you say, or how do you start that conversation?
That's interesting. Thanks for asking it that way, because I probably misinterpreted that before we started tonight, because I was thinking, oh yeah, take your iPad, take your phone.
Yeah.
You're looking for the internal, not motivation, but yeah, that courage. I love Tim Snyder, but I will let you guys know that I am a major gagger. Like, I have a hard time with smells. Maybe it's a spiritual gift, I don't know, but there were some smells with Tim that was making it really hard for me. And even if I'm not fearful of being rejected or talking to somebody, I mean, there was still a physical challenge for me for a time there to get used to that and be able to have that spiritual experience. And I even wrote in there that went away, and I was able to have a great experience with him. So yeah, recognize maybe some of those fears and those worries, and be real with those. Take those to the Lord first. Don't just throw yourself into an awkward or uncomfortable situation. Find ways that you identify those weaknesses and what you want to become strengths, what you want to have as an attribute as you get to know somebody. I was buoyed up rereading that post that you made, Joe, back in 2019. Some of the people commenting on there's 2 other people commenting on there that are stories similar to this one right here, that I've had the blessing just simply to be in their presence and follow that prompting. Talk to somebody. The one was at the Family History Conference at BYU. And we assumed if they're at the BYU Family History Conference that they're members of the church and stuff. She was not. She followed a prompting. She used all of her money to come from Arkansas and to do some awesome things with DNA and learn about it. And she helped my home teaching family's father find his birth mom, a guy in his 50s. And that's because I followed that prompting to talk to somebody in a classroom that looked and talked a little bit different than the rest of us. And so I'm not going to say it's about me, it's about, or each of us. It's saying, okay, I feel a little awkward in this moment. Other people do too. How do I allow God to be the one that's connecting us right now?
Eric. Yeah, Paula, go ahead. I think you're next.
Hi, my question is for Julie, and I'm just curious about how you use the hunters to help you? Is it that when they're out hunting, and they see something that might look like a stone or something, do they take the GPS coordinates for you where they're at?
Most of the hunters that are helping me are over the age of 70, and they are afraid of taking the GPS coordinates. So they will mark it with something, like they'll do orange rope in the tree or something, and they'll bring me to it to take the picture with my phone. So,
Okay.
but one of the things about hunters is that they won't sit in the cemeteries while they're hunting. And they know where they are and they keep an eye out for the cemeteries.
Okay, thank you. Very
You're
interesting.
welcome.
Yeah, Brent, go ahead.
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute. I just want to say thank you. 3 brilliant presentations. I have a great love, certainly, for what Todd is has done, certainly before and during his time with your team. Julie, I sincerely appreciate the work you're doing. I do wonder how we find all of the names of all those people. And this is a significant challenge, but I'm thinking about the work that the BYU Record Linking Lab is doing, especially with the African-American communities, and tying that together, because many of those names coming out now in the 1900, 1910 that tie back to the records that enslaved.org is working on could be brilliant in Virginia. But I'm intrigued by what Eric was talking about and this underserved community. And I even look in my own community here and I go, not only how can I connect, but we know where these people are. And it seems like such a beautiful connection that we could make with hundreds of thousands of people across the world in connecting back and reconnecting families. I'm touched with that message, but I'm also thinking about how could you go more than to the one and go to the masses? Any thoughts about that, Eric?
My thought is it's about having this shared emotional experience one-on-one, and it's the ripple effect of having that, encouraging that in others. I give Steve the credit. He's the one that pulled someone in from outside. And Steve's now on the other side. He's probably part of that. Let's give the credit to, or let's give the awareness of that mass approach is happening on the other side. And they are organized and they are encouraging us one by one to make those connections, to use these resources to, hey, we have access. We have our own little personal Urim and Thummim that we can pull up and show someone something that connects and helps them see their history and feel that emotional connection with that other person. So I'm probably one that's not as much of a institutional, hey, let's get everybody to do this and make it a project. Let's simply have the experiences and share that we have those experiences and encourage them to do the same thing with others. I think, for example, last night, part of the reason the trailer park comes up, I was working at Family History Center, our local stake, and they had a group from a local trailer park. Now, trailer park here is probably a little bit different. These are snowbirds who live here during the winter, and they have homes on Prince Edward Island that they live on during the summer. And so it's not necessarily underserved or needy, but they are looking, they are searching. And I got to have the one-on-one conversation with Wendy last night, look into her eyes and invite her not only to consider some of these ancestors, but also, as she started telling me stories, to invite her to record her mom who's still alive. Those are things that she can now do to help her mom to record some family history, and she can have the experiences with other people where she lives at and where she's going to go back to Prince Edward Island and share with people too.
Well, Todd, I have one last question for you. Like, what do you say to someone that's thinking about doing a service mission?
Do it. There's so many opportunities and you can accomplish so much. Most of our missionaries just have thousands and thousands of names that they've made connections to on the family tree. And it's a very rich, rewarding feeling as you realize that I've enabled, X thousands of people to make those connections and find their ancestors and have that those ordinances performed. It's a great, great feeling.
Thanks for all you did with the BYU NAO. So I'm really grateful for everyone that came. Just to recap, I mean, I'm just so grateful to Todd what he did with the BYU NAO. He took it from something that wasn't a thing, and now to pass the baton to Lisa Gardner and just have it there as a real thing is just been amazing. And I still remember the first time we had lunch together to talk about it. It was just kind of like, it's neat to see it grow from that. And Julie, I was just so inspired by the different records that you showed us. I love the thought that we can go deep. We can go so deep in one community. We could just keep looking and looking and looking and make sure we don't miss anyone. Like those cemeteries you showed, they were just really inspiring because I don't know, it's like memories that we want to keep, that people can have that connection. And then Eric, I just want to say I was inspired the first time I heard your story, and I loved rehearing it. And I guess what I'll say is I'm going to commit myself to try to have an experience like that. Just really grateful for all the things that were shared tonight. So with that, we'll close our meeting, and we'll see you guys again in a month.